Hello, you're watching Economic Lifelines Nigeria. I'm Wale Famrewa. In today's program, we take a look at how authorities in Nigeria are turning around the fortunes of agribusinesses in Africa's most populous country. Owners of farms like the one I'm standing in today have endured years of neglect and corruption. Over the 60s and 70s, Nigeria depended a lot more on crude oil, and as a result, agriculture that provided Nigeria's food and the bulk of foreign exchange earnings took a backseat. Subsequent attempts to turn around the sector have been met by endemic corruption in the supply of key ingredients like fertilizers and seedlings. But a new approach to reviving the sector has now provided a lifeline to farmers across the country. Nigeria's economy today is largely an oil story. Over 90% of the country's foreign exchange earnings are from crude oil sales. Back in the 1960s, however, the landscape was very different.
At one point, Nigerian agriculture was great. We led the world in many commodities, leading traders in everything from cocoa to groundnuts to cotton, etc., etc.
In the 1960s, we played big. We were the largest producer and supplier to the global market of groundnuts. We had 47% of the global market. We were well ahead of the United States, well ahead of Argentina and everybody else. And you had all across the northern states of Nigeria, in particular Kano, the groundnut pyramids that we used to have. And today, we are basically at 0% of that market. We've lost that market. Now, we were the largest also when it came to oil palm production in the world. We are 8% of the global production of palm oil. Today, we've been overtaken by countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, basically because, again, we abandoned it. Today, we're a net importer of crude palm oil. I can say the same thing also for cocoa. We were the second largest producer of cocoa in the world in the 1960s. We accounted for 18% of global supply of cocoa. Today, we've lost that market to Ivory Coast, we've lost it to Cameroon, Ghana, and right on our tail, other countries just as Indonesia as well. Cotton, we were number one in cotton in West Africa, well ahead of countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. All those countries have overtaken us because we abandoned agriculture.
Agriculture contributed about 65% of our GDP in the 60s and early 70s. Now it's down all the way to 42%. Why? Because manufacturing has increased, trading has increased, government expenditure has increased, oil has increased, and also hospitality and telecommunications. So as a part of the mix, agricultural production has increased, but it is increasing at a slower pace than the economy is growing.
Historical trade data reflects the staggering decline in the agricultural sector of sub-Saharan Africa's second largest economy. In the early 1960s, Nigeria accounted for 47% of global trade in groundnuts and 28% of oil palm. Today, Nigeria contributes less than 1% of global trade in either of these crops. Similar declines are seen in the country's share of the world's cocoa and cotton trade. All this linked to the country's newfound prosperity from crude oil as the focus on black gold relegated agribusiness to the back burner.
As we abandoned agriculture, we paid a very heavy price. We moved from a self-sufficient production system to a net importing situation, to the extent that now we were importing and spending $11 billion importing basic things like wheat, rice, sugar, and fish. It doesn't make any sense given our potential. So the oil, while it has been good for us in terms of money, it has been terrible for us in terms of agriculture because we neglected it. So it is that neglect that has made us to lose our competitiveness.
Despite the sharp drop in foreign exchange earnings from agriculture, the sector remains a key part of Nigeria's economy and the leading employer of Nigeria's young population.
Agriculture is 40% of GDP, and smallholder agriculture, so these are farmers working on typically around 5 hectares of land or less, make up north of 90 to 95% of the agriculture sector. The individual wakes up in the morning, they're hardworking, they want to go out and farm and get the best out of their land, but they have to walk 20, 30 kilometers to find somebody to sell them fertilizer. More than likely that person's selling them adulterated product that's half sand, half fertilizer. They're buying it from a guy who's buying it from a guy who's buying it from a guy, so they ended up paying ridiculously high prices. They have no access to working capital. And the reality on the ground is, show me a business that's successful that can access working capital, that funds itself 100% equity. And these are all the reasons why they're now stuck in this cycle of poverty. Because even at the end of the day, when they have that meager harvest and they try to get the best price for it, they are in a very weak position in output markets and get taken advantage of, and hence are unable to get the optimum value for that product. And so that's why generation after generation after generation, they're stuck in poverty.
One of the major impacts is urbanization. People have moved from the rural area to the urban areas to become Okada riders, motorcycle riders, urban transit, and as a matter of fact, even dysfunctional behavior, robbery, crime, and all of that, kidnapping and ransom.
The neglect in the sector has come at a huge cost to Nigerian farmers like Pastor Njoku and Michael Adedoku. The consequences include poor training and a lack of access to inputs such as fertilizers and high-quality seedlings.
It has been so difficult for us to get fertilizer for our crops. And then you see, by buying it in retail, we used to buy it in we call it in pints. We go to the market to buy paint, not in bags. So it has been so difficult, and we have to trek a distance.
In fact, before we've been doing these things, farming in blindness, without adequate training or facilities, things to help us as regards to soil, the things to apply.
Sometimes we need to apply fertilizer and we don't have enough money to buy. You see, we will not be able to get the exact, and already our ground is it has gone. It's not fertile again. We have to put something to make it, to boost it up.
The problem many farmers face is provision of funds, because one man cannot be able to do the plowing, the cutting of grass without money. And besides, the seedlings at times, they are very exorbitant.
Before the last 24 months, so let me just put it that way, it was hectic for us. It was 1 year, one step forward this year, 3 steps backward the following year. In the sense that if we have bumper harvest this year of cassava, and by the time you're unable to sell your products, the glut sets in. The middlemen made nonsense of it, and the pricing itself was not encouraging.
All gave Nigeria easy money. So Nigerians actually stopped looking into agriculture. People moved out of rural areas into urban areas in search of white-collar jobs. And as that happened, the expenditure on the agriculture sector, basic infrastructure went down. Investment in irrigation went down. Investment in research and development, as well as investment in extension, went down because of that. So as a result of that today, you find that 5% of our farmers are using improved seed. You find that in terms of extension effort, our extension ratio of our extension workers to farmers is 1 to 20,000. And that is 20 times below the internationally accepted global average. You see, in terms of our agricultural sector, in terms of irrigation, only, in fact, less than 1% of our agriculture arable area is actually irrigated. So it's been a lot of abandonment, but that was the past. And that's what, under this administration, we've decided to change.
Previous attempts to improve farming conditions in Nigeria have also been largely frustrated by corruption.
We all know that in the past that the federal government procurement system, for supply of fertilizers never worked. It was loaded with corruption. It was loaded with, the middlemen stripped the subsidies. Farmers never really got the fertilizers. We had poor quality of fertilizers coming to the markets as a result of people trying to maximize their returns, the middlemen, either by not delivering or by mixing it with all sorts of things.
The government in the past was buying and distributing seed. So as that happened, the quality of seed being sold to farmers was actually quite poor. And so the farmers would not come by and buy the improved seed. Government was buying and selling fertilizer. And so you had situations where, it's a very, very corrupt sector. And people would sell half sand and half fertilizers. And so the productivity of agriculture was declining, even as expenditure on fertilizer input use was going up. Farmers found it very difficult to get access to finance because the banks stopped lending to agriculture and they were lending to the petroleum and gas industry. And so these are some of the structural issues that happened that led to let me say, a decapitalization of the agricultural sector.
Today, however, there is reason for cautious optimism for a paradigm shift in Nigeria's approach to agriculture. President Goodluck Jonathan has listed agriculture as a key component of an economic development program, aptly described as the transformation agenda. The policy to diversify Nigeria's economy away from oil and more towards agriculture is led by Agriculture Minister Akinwumi Adesina, an agriculture economist with over 20 years' experience in agriculture, development policy, and rural development on the African continent. Investors and farmers are optimistic about the new plan.
Well, the comment I would make, and I guess the comment is a reflection on the government's policy and the drive and energy, I would say it's on track in the concept of talking up the importance of agriculture in Nigeria. That in itself is worth its weight in gold.
The new minister's agenda to transform the economy is in so many ways quite commendable. One of the things we see is what he calls the creation of the export processing centers or zones in several parts of the country. And what this does is to try to bring together the resources that are required by businesses all together in one location, such that you could have a place where there is good roads for easy accessibility, where there is power for people like us who are into processing, where there is security. And all of these things are things that enable businesses to reduce their costs over time and eventually begin to be able to compete with international investors.
To change agriculture requires that we actually change our approach to agriculture. We have ended looking at agriculture, therefore, as a development program, a development sector. It's not a social sector, it's a money-making sector. So under the administration of President Goodluck Jonathan, we established what is called the Agricultural Transformation Agenda. And that agenda is actually to make Nigeria's agriculture more productive, more efficient, more competitive, to add more food into our domestic food supply, to reduce our dependence in terms of food imports, to earn more foreign exchange, and to create millions of jobs through the agricultural sector. So it is going back, if you want, to the glory days of Nigeria's agriculture. That's the trajectory on where we are right now.
After the break, we find out how Nigeria's Agriculture Ministry is providing a lifeline to farmers in dire need of capital and key farming inputs.